Today is going to be an add-on discussion on top of the discussion we had last week about file management. And so we give a brief overview of file management, and today we're going to talk about troubleshooting file management. This session will be recorded and will be distributed, so you don't have to take notes. You can refer to the video later. I do want to take just a quick second here to go through a brief overview for those of you who may not have been on this last session. We talked about file management, and generally the process is as follows. You have a server, and OpenManage is on that server. And if it's a Windows box, it's going to have an internal file server. But if it's not going to have an internal file server. It's going to have an external file server. And Windows boxes can have an external file server as well. And so for the case of this troubleshooting exercise, we're going to just focus on the external server. And so the graphic here is representing that we can have an external server outside of the OpenManage server itself. Or in the case of the .ova file or some Linux systems, you can have the external server actually reside on the same server as OpenManage, but it's still called an external server. So generally the process is, number one, OpenManage is going to send a command to the device when you ask it to back up. And it's going to have the syntax similar to what's shown here. It's going to tell the device to run this command. The network device runs that command, and it goes and tries to put a particular file onto the file server, the external file server. That's step two. And then lastly, once that file has been put there and OpenManage gets that acknowledgement, it's going to go do a get from OpenManage to get that file off the server. So it's sort of a three-stage process. Today we're going to troubleshoot the three areas of this process. I'm going to go down to slide 6 here, which is where I started my discussion on the troubleshooting. Okay, so in the first case here, we're going to troubleshoot two cases, or talk about it at least, between issues between the OpenManage server itself and the network device. In the case one, we're going to have a case where OpenManage cannot contact the device, and what do we do about that? And then case two is going to be the device login credentials are bad, and how do we determine that? Those are some of the common areas. So the first case here, when you've tried to execute against a device and for some reason it cannot even contact the network device, you're going to get this error, no route to host. And so clearly this is a basic troubleshooting, network troubleshooting thing, is why is that IP address that we think it's at not responding, or why can't we contact it? So to resolve this, you want to check things like, did the device IP change? Is there a new firewall or network change affecting the route to the device? So some simple things you can do is just ping the device. You can try CLI login. You can use network tools portlet that we have, and I'll show you that here. In fact, I'll show you that now, but you can also use a third-party tool to try to do various things, for, like using a command line, a tool like PuTTY to go and log into the device. Or even you can try the web interface on the device if it has a web interface. And this is all just going to validate that we can reach the IP. And so one tool I want to show you here is the network tools portlet that's available. And so normally when you go to a device and you right-click and go do something, for example, direct access or do a MIB browser, it's using that device's authentication credentials. But you can also test devices using the network tools portlet that's outside of managed devices. Any IP address you can go in and try to do various things to. And so you can do the same thing as ping. I can go ping my device and it'll give me some ping results back. Again, it doesn't have to be under management, it can be any IP. Same with the MIB browser and direct access. And so in direct access, it's not even, I'll give you an example here. It'll give you an option here. Do you want to use Telnet SSH or SSH-v2? The device may support any of these or none of these, and so you just got to pick the one that works, or find the one that works. So you can use something here and just pick that, and it will go direct access to the box. You have to type in username and password, but this is just a way to verify that you can get to the device and then you can actually log into it, and that's there for you. And again, you can use a third-party tool if you want to. Okay, so that's generally what you want to do. It's just a basic network troubleshooting problem there to figure out why you're not getting to the device. And using those three ideas there, you should be able to determine why you're not getting access to the device. Back up here. So I'm sorry, that was contact the device. The second one here that we want to look at, case two, is the login to the device actually fails. So in this case, we're actually getting to the device, but now authentication is failing. And so you see here a pretty clear error here, too many authentication failures. And so you just can't authentication is failing. So that points to some obvious things that our authentication is incorrect somewhere. So either what we're sending is not what the device is expecting, or either the username or the password is incorrect. So what do we do to try to test that? So a couple of things here. You can try, again, direct access through the network tools, or directly from the command line. That's probably the best way to go. And so when you again, as I mentioned, as you go to a device here, when you do a right click and go to direct access directly, it's going to actually use the device's login credentials to log into that device. That is your test to say, hey, OpenManage has the right credentials. So that would be the first thing that I would try. If that's not working, then what I would do is recheck the authentication that's associated to the device. And so a couple easy ways to do that. You can just right-click and edit the device. And in this first tab here, you have Management Interface. This is going to tell us what protocol we're using. And so, maybe you're trying to do SSH v2 and it only understands Telnet, or vice versa. Or maybe you don't even have an SSH interface. That would mean that you didn't discover the device with an SSH interface, and so maybe you need to add one. So you can add one here, the credential. But the second part of this is authentication. Are the authentication objects you created during discovery and associated with the device, are they correct still? Or maybe you discovered it and something changed. Maybe the device credentials changed. And so you want to check these credentials and make sure that your values are still correct. And so where you do that is in the discovery panel here. This is your authentication profile. So you want to go and recheck what they are, or maybe even reset them if they're new and not working. Maybe delete the old one, create a new one, that kind of thing, to make sure your credentials are correct. As I mentioned here, recreate a new known valid authentication object. Sorry about that. Change page on me here. In some cases, the device may have a session limit that's being exceeded. And that's the same case where it won't be able to log in. And so you may also get this error. You may get a timeout error as well, but that's something to consider. Okay, so that's pretty much the login case there. So that's typically the issues we see between the server and the network device. The next case here is going to be between the device and the external file server. And so we're going to cover three cases here. Case 3 is going to be where the file server IP cannot be reached. Case 4, we're going to talk about incorrect credentials. And then number 5, we'll look at no space on the file server. So let's go on to those detailed cases here. So in the first case, the file server cannot be reached. You're going to get this type of error, file transfer failed. And this is a very common error. And this is actually the message that's coming back from the device. It has nothing to do with OpenManage specifically. It's really just the device that's saying transfer failed. It doesn't say why it can't be reached, or for whatever reason. We're just at the mercy of what the device tells us. And so it's a bit generic, but let's look at some things we can do here. So if it can't be reached, the first thing you want to do is look at this audit log here. And you can highlight each line, and it'll give you a message. And what you see here is that I've highlighted down to a line here, and I got this message that shows up in the bottom pane here. What you want to try possibly is taking this command directly and cut and pasting it right on the box, right on the device. And I'll show you an example of that. And so I'll take this command here. Oh, shoot, it's not going to let me cut and paste it. All right, I won't show you that, but you can just log into the device normally through a third-party tool and just cut and paste that directly. Again, that's all we send to the device here, this command here, copy, run, and config, blah, blah, blah. And so if you see that it's failing there, then that again is not OpenManage that's failing. It's something between the device and the file server. And in this case, what it looks like is that this command right here is showing an IP address of 100.35.35.81. Well, I know that my file server is supposed to be 10.35.35.81. So it's going to the wrong IP address. And so just by reviewing this command, I know that that's the problem. And so basically, you just fix the file server and reset the IP address to the right IP, and that will resolve your problem. And so other cases where that you might try if that's not working is you can also ping the file server directly from the device. You know, if you can ping the file server from the device, that at least says that it can be reached. And 9 times out of 10, if it can't be reached, there's some other problem going on, but that's one test. There could also be something blocking between the device and the file server, and there could be new network changes that you're not aware of. So those are things to consider there. Okay. I think I jumped around here a little bit. So we talked about it can't be reached. We want to look at incorrect credentials. Oh, that's this one here. And so again, you're going to get the same error message here. File transfer failed. And it's going to be a similar type of troubleshooting. Again, highlight these lines. And what you see here again, copy, running config, SFTP, TFTP users. So this is the username that gets sent, right? That it needs to log in with. This is just the syntax the box needs to go and contact that server. If I know right off the bat that my username is not users, it's FTP user with no. So that tells me right away that, hey, that's my problem. I can go fix my server or my credentials that are in my file server, and that should resolve my problem. Now, just note too that you might have a bad credential, and so that's not going to show up here, but it's still going to show up with the same problem. So again, you want to go check your credential. You may have set the credential, and let me just go over there to show you. The file servers are configured in a couple of places. Probably the best place to go is in Resources File Management. In the file servers here, and you see I have a couple of file servers set up. I can edit one. And so this is where we set up our configuration for the file server. We discussed this in our first meeting. And you can see here that if the credentials, if the login name is wrong or the password is wrong, it's going to try to use that, and that's not going to work. You'll also get this message when the device is out of space. This is going to say transfer failed. And so the last thing to check here is to go onto your file server. And in my case, I'm using a Linux external file server. And so you would go on the device and use your Linux commands to go and check and make sure that there's enough space allocated in that location where your file server is set up at. You could be using other external servers like TFTP daemon or 3C daemon or TFTP64 or whatever it may be. And so you need to go on to wherever that server is located, whether Windows or whatever, and make sure that there's enough space there. Just if nothing else is working, then that's one thing you want to check is the space. And then also on your file server, you also want to check these to make sure they're working. There's a test utility on here where you can go and test, and it will run through all the protocols of putting and getting files from that server. So as long as you get a green light and it's working here, then it should be working with the application. Same here with the other one. You can just go test it. Okay. All right. So did I cover all of those? Make sure I covered all of those. I think I missed one here. Oh, no space. We covered the last one there. Okay. And then the last part of this is troubleshooting issues between the external file server and OpenManage. Remember that OpenManage goes out and gets the file after the network device has already put the file onto the server. So case number 6 we're going to look at is the file server IP cannot be seen by OpenManage, and then case number 7 is the file isn't in the FTP get location, and so you'll get something like a no such file. Let's look at that next. Okay, so in this case, this is a case where OpenManage address that is expected to go to and get that file. So you're going to see something like this. It's going to tell you what file server it's using. This is a bit of a test case scenario here. What I ended up doing was setting it up so that OpenManage thinks it's going to put it on one IP, and then it tries to read it from another IP. So you can see here by my commands how that's set up. What I wanted to just show you here is that you'll get this type of error. It may not be this exact same IPs, but you'll see these things unable to write or something like unable to execute read or execute transferring file. That's the last step. It's kind of an indicator that there's something going on there, some sort of mismatch. But this is why it's very important that you have both your TFTP and your FTP or your SFTP all writing to the same directory. So again, your resolution steps here are to review the audit trail log messages, verify that the file server IP and configuration, verify that they're correct, and especially if you're using an external IP. And we talked about this originally on the last call, and I'll cover that in a little bit of detail here. But you also need to rule out any firewalls or network changes that may lie between the OMNM server as well as between the OMNM server and the file server. There could be also network changes and as well as firewall issues. So just a brief note on the external IP. I'll show you one here. Let me go back to my diagram here. This is on page 13. Let's go back up to this diagram here. So there may be cases where you want to use an external IP address on your file server. And what that means is that in some cases, the file server may be the same device, but the network device sees it as one IP. Maybe it's on a different NIC because it's in a different domain. You may have a different NIC address. And then OMNM sees it as a different IP because there's a separate NIC on this server. And so in that case, if you write to a specific IP address, it could be a different IP address here, and it can still be read as long as everything is configured to be reading and writing to the same TFTP, FTP locations. And so if they're not, then you're going to have this kind of problem that I just showed. And so let me just talk about the external just a little bit again. You have this external IP address field. You can leave it completely blank unless you have that case where you need to write to two different IPs. And so what's going to happen is when you set this IP address, when OMNM sends the command to the device, it's going to say copy run to TFTP or FTP, and it's going to use that IP address here, that external IP. So that's how the device knows to write to this device, write the device to this external file server, and then OMNM uses the internal IP or the normal IP to go and get it. Okay? So that's kind of a little explanation of what happened here. You might have, I was forcing this case so that we could show an error of why the write to the FTP server is successful, but the read off of the server is unsuccessful, showing that problem between the file server and OMNM. But you may have other cases where, again, you may just have a misconfiguration of your directories for your TFTP and FTP. Okay, and then the last one here, basically the file isn't in the FTP get location or there's no such file. This is similar to the last one here, except that the file is just not there. And again, this is another case, another example of an error that you would see when the file is, this is more of the situation where you're writing to one file using one file server and the same the directories just aren't set up right. You'll get this kind of error here. So it's able to send the command here. You see the command being sent to this file server. It's executing the commands against the device. But then it says error transferring the file. This is where it's trying to go back to OMNM right here, where it says transferring file. No such file error. And you can see the file name here. Unable to write a backup file to the application server. So this tells you that it's unable to write the file into OMNM. And so that's another indication that there's a problem, a mismatch getting the file off of the file server. And so again, just highlighting some of the resolved issues here. Again, highlight each line in the top pane so you can see the messages in the lower pane. In this case, the file is missing when OMNM tries to retrieve it. You want to confirm that TFTP, SFTP, TFTP, all these are all set up to read and write to the same directory. That's an important point too. You may have write directories, but you may not have you may have write permissions, but you may not have read permissions. So there's another case where you want to verify your permissions as well. If it's not just a simple directory mismatch, then if it's still failing, then check your permissions. So again, I say verify that the credentials allow read and write on the file server. And so you can test this by manually trying FTP, TFTP, or SCP puts and gets on the server, but you need to use the same credentials that OMNM's using so that we know we're going to the same directories. If that's still failing, then yeah, you just need to reset the file permissions. Okay, that was a quick pass through here.